Well, leading Labor figures have painted a despondent mood to close out 2021. 30 Labor right frontbench MPs, unionists and faction activists have penned essays for a new book titled The Right Stuff, Voices of Unity for Labor's Future, discussing successive federal election losses and a call to arms for 2021. For their opinions on this and a whole lot more, I'm joined now by former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman in Brisbane and federal Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon in Canberra. Joel, I'll start with you if I can. This isn't you speaking, and this is the authors of these essays in the book, but they are broadly concerned, they like the bloke, but broadly concerned with Anthony Albanese's leadership. You said the other day that he'll lead the Labor Party to the next election. Do you still have that view?
G'day, Peter. G'day, Campbell. I don't think anyone in their essays said anything about Anthony Albanese, Peter, although I haven't read them. I think the point they were making is that this is not about personalities, it's about policy and narrative. And of course, most of them were making the same point I've been making for the last 18 months. And that is that if we don't get the party back to the sensible centre, if we don't return to support for our traditional base, if we don't go into the election campaign with more moderate and inclusive language, then we shouldn't expect to win the next election.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I said, you know, that there's a general view Anthony Albanese is a good bloke, Joel, but the party has lost its way, if I can say that, in terms of how it connects with people in the middle, sure, but enough in electorates around the country and seats that change government, and it's doing its level best from the outside looking in at alienating those voters, not bringing them into the fold.
I think the party has lost its way. I've said that on many occasions. You know, we were born to serve working class people, born out of the shearing sheds of Queensland and the wharves of Balmain. We've long supported blue collar workers in all sorts of industries, including the coal and gas and oil industries. And you know, to win an election, Peter, you have to be very diverse in your messaging. To win a federal election, of course, you have to be able to pick up the requisite number of seats in each of the states, including Central and North Queensland, for example. You know, we've only won a majority in the House of Representatives once in the last 27 years. I've been here for almost 25 years and served just 6 years in office. I've said many times that you can have the best policies in the world, including the best environmental policies, but if they stay in the top drawer after every election, then you're not serving the millions who hope for a Labor government from time to time.
Campbell, I always say, you know, you can't win an election from opposition until you've hit rock bottom and you do this sort of soul searching. And clearly, it might be good for the coalition, but clearly, if Labor's prepared to put this stuff on paper, to go out there and engage on this sort of philosophical debate about where they are headed, where they've been, where they've failed, that tells you they're determined to come back, doesn't it?
Look, it certainly does. And if some of the stuff that's been reported about in this book of essays sort of taken on board, I think Labor can very quickly actually become competitive. Look at Anastasia Palaszczuk in the recent state election. Yes, COVID is a factor, but she's got a primary vote with a 4 in front of it, whereas nationally it's down about 1/3. You know, Labor really should be listening to the people on the right, people like Joel, and you know what? That would be healthy for our country as well, because frankly I think the coalition are skewing somehow inexorably to the left, listening to a lot of the same sort of chattering class intelligentsia people in the inner cities of our major capitals, and that's not good for the overall direction of the country. We do need to not only be looking after the environment, of course, but we've got to provide, you know, jobs for people, good, honest jobs, meaningful jobs, and that's why I totally support the things that are being talked about by the Labor right in this book.
Right, Campbell, you've been a premier. All this talk about debt doesn't matter if it's so cheap, and these 2 downgrades, pretty bad downgrade in Victoria, also a downgrade in New South Wales in terms of the AAA. What do you make of it all?
Well, for states, it is critically important. Debt does matter. The Commonwealth is a different kettle of fish when you've got your own bank and the printing presses. So talking about the states, who's lending that money? Well, you know, international, lenders, essentially. And there comes a moment, if you can't pay the interest or you are trying to defer on payments and the like, and that's what's happened in places like Latin America and South America. And immediately I think some people are saying, oh, that's a bit hysterical. Well, the level of debt now is so extreme in Queensland and in Victoria, and to a certain extent New South Wales, they have better capacity to pay, that there will come a moment where the tap gets turned off. And people say, well, no, the only way we'll lend to you is if the terms are onerous or the interest rates come with a high risk premium. And the other thing, Peter, is interest rates may be down now, but at some stage they will go back up and the interest bill will rapidly mount and affect the ability to deliver the normal frontline services that all residents expect, such as police, hospitals, ambulances, etc.
I want to go to the Brereton report if I can, Joel. It's not going away, and I made the point at the top of the show. It's one of those issues that has cut through like nothing else out there in the real world. I mean, Canberra might want to talk about other things in the final sitting fortnight. This is what Australians are talking about. Heston Russell was very strong today, pushed very hard, very much campaigning on a Royal Commission and a better handling, a fairer handling of the Brereton report. Where are you on this?
We certainly need a Royal Commission into veteran suicide, Peter. There's no replacement for a Royal Commission on that front. Look, I stand with our troops. I remain very, very concerned that the way this has been handled has allowed this issue to reflect on all of our Special Forces soldiers and indeed all members of the Australian Defence Force. The Brereton inquiry was necessary, and again, those who may be guilty of unlawful conduct will need to pay a heavy price. But we also have to focus on those still serving, those who have served, who've done no more than put their lives on the line for their country. The way that, look, the Brereton report can't be challenged. We'll let the processes flow there, but we've got to be thinking about the way it was handled in the media, the way they allowed such a big gap to emerge between those letters to Her Majesty, for example, and the public announcement, the way Scott Morrison failed to stand up when the redacted report was released, because that was his opportunity to say, hey, to the Australian people, hey, this should not reflect and will not reflect on the majority of ADF members doing the right thing. And that's the great shame of all this. We should not be taking medals off people, by the way, until we've gone through all the processes, including any pending legal processes. And can I just say, Peter, we've got to think about those heroes who stood up in the face of, you know, great adversity, really, to call out the wrongs of Afghanistan. And remember, the ultimate people responsible for this were those who sent them there in the most difficult circumstances and pushed them to the limit of their human capabilities.
Campbell, you've been a military officer. I'm going to stick my neck out here. I don't think the government now can avoid a Royal Commission. I think they will be forced to have a Royal Commission. And I do think, I said this is cut through, but I do think the handling of the Brereton report's release has been poor.
Well, I might just park Brereton because I've made my views fairly well known in recent weeks, and I basically, in a nutshell, I agree with what Joel has just said. In terms of the Royal Commission, though, I don't agree, and I'm also not only a former serviceman myself, but I'm the son of a Vietnam veteran, and I know very well many of his friends and former colleagues. So my view is this: a Royal Commission on this is a feeding frenzy for high-priced lawyers. And really what we need to do for veterans, to me, is very clear-cut. We need to make sure that we've got all the social support services there for them after a conflict like Afghanistan. And we've got to make sure that they have access to support to get new employment and jobs. And you know what? Frankly, state and federal governments have done a few things, but not nearly enough to make sure that people who've left the services can actually get gainful employment and indeed get perhaps even given preference. Those real practical measures are what's required to deal with this, in my view. Access to social support and access to meaningful employment. And a Royal Commission, Well, I think we already know the answers, that we've treated our veterans shabbily. My heart goes out to the parents who are working so hard for this Royal Commission, but I'd really urge them to think about it because, you know, again, we do know in our heart of hearts what the answers are, and we need to get on and actually implement the outcomes, not feed the lawyers and pay their fees.
Joel, just on that point, I mean, why can't we do better, you know, no HECS for university for veterans when they leave.
The GI
big
Bill
corporations
after World War
taking them
II.
up. Well, exactly right. And why can't the public service be? Well, why can't the Veterans Department have more veterans in it, Joel? That'd be a good start.
Well, I think we can do all of those things, Peter. I think Campbell's made very valid points. But we can have a Royal Commission. We can do more practical things for our veterans, including the suggestion you have just made. These are people who have put their lives on the line wearing the Australian uniform, and they've done it for us. And if that's not a project worth investing in a number of ways, we've named at least 3 of them, then I don't know what is. I do know one thing. The Australian community is standing behind men and women in uniform, and in particular they're standing behind those Special Forces soldiers who went into the most dangerous part of the world, fighting an enemy without uniform, an enemy which fights to no rules, and with some pretty vague and changing military objectives from those who are working above them.
Yeah, it's 5 or 6 Prime Ministers in that time, and they were resolute. We'll leave it there. Campbell Newman, Joel Fitzgibbon, thank you for your time.
Peter, Joel.
Thanks, team.